Hi, my name is Cheyenne Campbell, and I am a volunteer at the National Museum of the United States Army. I am a huge history nerd. Grew up traveling around, visiting all of the museums that I possibly can, and spending way more time in them than my family would have preferred. So a chance to spend my free time at a museum and sharing the Army story, sharing, in some ways my story as an Army brat, just seemed like a fantastic way to, continue contributing to the Army. I would say the chunk of the Berlin Wall in the Changing World Gallery. I've been to Berlin. I've seen the remains of the wall that are still there. I've seen bits and pieces of it in other museums, in various other countries, and across the US. So seeing that here, seeing global reach, I guess, is really cool. And it's just sort of a symbol of freedom and peace after years of conflict from the Cold War, so I just think that's really cool. Talking to the people, the visitors obviously, because they've always got great stories, whether they're personal stories from their own service in the military or family members or completely unaffiliated with the military, but just really interested and really want to share their own interests in history and with particular artifacts or time periods, but also the other volunteers. I love spending all of our quieter moments talking to the other volunteers, the docents, getting their histories, their stories of their own service or of their own impressions and experiences with the military. It's such a big community. Aside from the soldiers themselves, which obviously is many, many people, very accomplished people doing their very best to serve the US, there's also the Army families. I'm an Army brat, so, part of that community, but also DoD civilians, Army civilians working to support the Army mission in all kinds of different ways and areas of expertise. The community on military bases, the MWR staff, the medical staff, anybody that supports the military in some way. There's so many more people involved than most people think about on an average day basis. Back when we first opened, I guess last November, I was wandering through through the Changing World Gallery, and I met this mother and son, and the son was an active duty soldier. His mother was visiting from, I don't know, somewhere in the Midwest. But they were both so impacted by the newsreel of 9/11, and then they were looking at the artifacts from the Pentagon, and just spent probably 20 or 30 minutes talking to them about memories of that day, memories of how that impacted, everyday life, both for soldiers as well as just the average civilian. And they were just this fantastic pair of visitors that, they were so interested in being at the museum, seeing how things that they don't really think about are so important to the Army history. I'm hoping that they're going to come back and be volunteers eventually. When I was born, both of my parents were in the Army. My mom is an Army nurse. My dad was a medical lab tech. He got out in the first couple of years of my life, but my mom served for a total of 30 years. She just retired a couple of years ago. So we followed her around to all of her various duty stations. Kind of the fun Army brat thing to do when you're meeting somebody else is to count how many times you moved, how many schools you attended. For me, that's something like 10 or 12 schools over the course of my younger education, most of them DoD schools in foreign countries. Yeah, it's such a unique life way of life, I guess, that it's kind of that instant connection whenever you're talking to somebody else and suddenly you have the exact same expression on your face of when somebody asks, oh, where are you from? Because for us Army brats, it doesn't tend to be, a particular location. It's like where do you consider home, or where were you stationed the longest, or things like that. So it's really cool just seeing how big the Army brat community is, and how many of us are actually working as volunteers for the museum. There's a surprising number that were Army brats or Army family in some way. When we were living in Belgium, we had family come and visit, my uncle and his family. We visited Normandy as well as some other locations in the area, and kind of saw that the history there. I mean, obviously you learn about the D-Day invasions in school, you learn about kind of the end of World War II and the US's involvement in World War II, but actually being able to go to the beaches, go to, Utah Beach is one of the ones that we focused on, as well as the town nearby, where many of the paratroopers that came in, they've still got representations of them there. There's a cast figure that's actually hanging from his parachute on top of the church in that town, because he got stuck back when they first were landing. And so, the church was damaged and they replaced the stained glass with depictions of D-Day because it made such an impact on the people of that town. So just kind of seeing all of how they remember it, as well as, seeing the actual locations, was really kind of magical. I mean, depressing in many, many ways, obviously, but it was really cool just to see that, how the history then kind of still impacts and how it changed the town and the area. I would say I would want people to learn that it's not just men that are soldiers. When I tell people that I'm an Army brat, everybody assumes that it was my dad that served, and he did, but it wasn't for the duration of my primary experiences. There's so many female soldiers serving in all kinds of different locations, different specialties. We've got some great volunteers that are also female soldiers, whether active duty or retired, mostly retired, I believe. But yeah, it's not just a boys' club anymore. It hasn't been for many years, but so many people still forget that and they just assume, and I would want people to kind of recognize and take a second to think about that. It's the best. I know a lot of people outside of the community think that it could be, rude or pejorative, but for anybody really in the Army brat community, it's who we are. It's very much an identity. I consider myself a brat before many other things. It's not a rude term. It's, a couple of years ago they tried to kind of encourage the community to move to some other term. It was some weird acronym, CHAMPS maybe. Everybody was like, no, we've been brats for, hundreds of years. Army brats have been following families around since, before the revolution even. So they're certainly not going to change that now with some, especially civilians, trying to say, let's not call people that. Like, we are brats. That's what we prefer to be called. I have a weirdly detailed knowledge of the Nuremberg Trials, which occurred to try the war criminals after World War II. I studied it in school. It was kind of a specialty of mine. So I really can break down how the Army was involved in collecting the evidence for that, working with the other nations for collecting evidence, putting together the witnesses, putting together statements, and then kind of the ongoing involvement of the Army throughout that process, as they tried the criminals, and then, you know, in later years moving on towards the after effects of war, the after effects of those trials. I mean, the whole thing, it's a really cool space. One of my favorite things is seeing people come in and just kind of right there at the entrance, they just stop and kind of gaze around and wonder at the lobby, you know, looking up at the ribbons on the ceiling and then the campaign wall, just the amazing space. There's so much history involved. There's just ongoing improvements and, you know, more information being shared. It's just such a great space. It's such a great collection. The history is fascinating. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is worth the wait.